Hello and welcome back to Paddock and Track, the show where we bring you news on and off the track. I'm Max and I'm joined as always by Amaan.
What's up, guys?
And today we have another episode for you, cranking out these guys that we're a little behind on. Today we have the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, the Grand Prix that has the longest name on the calendar because they loaded up with sponsors. But yeah, I think it was a really good race, actually.
I think so, yeah. It was really fun to watch.
Especially as we got towards the end, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But I really liked it. It was a really good race.
Me too.
So, starting off with the qualifying results, pretty standard qualifying for most people.
Yes.
Verstappen on pole, of course. A good qualifying from both of you carbs, actually. P7 for Sonoda and P9 for Ricardo.
Yep.
So, good start for them to this race. Hulkenberg also making it into Q3, so good for Haas. But Perez missing out on Q3.
Oof.
11th place for him. As we've seen before, Perez seems to kind of fall off once we get to the second half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the same pattern as last year, but we also see the gap between his teammate Max Verstappen and himself. And is it really the Red Bull or is it really him?
Yeah, that's the question that it asks is because we've seen Perez's performance be okay.
Yes.
It was kind of the same thing in Miami. And so it's interesting to see, like you said, that gap between those two to see, is it really the car or is it the driver?
Yes.
Yeah, so looking down the rest of the grid, again, nothing very too out of the ordinary. Alonso did start from the pit lane, but other than that, pretty standard qualifying for most drivers.
Yeah.
So before we even get into the race, Leclerc has a brand new race engineer. Great for Ferrari because they've kind of needed it for a while.
Yeah, I mean, his old engineer really didn't do really much to help Leclerc out, but I feel like his new engineer will, I think, take him to, I don't know, better
places. I hope so. Because I think Leclerc definitely deserves that.
Yeah, he does.
But, so good for Ferrari and for Leclerc to get that new race engineer. It'll be, I think, helpful for him, him. And I listened to a couple bits of radio after the race. Yeah, it sounded like his new engineer is very, encouraging.
Very encouraging, yes.
Which is good for Leclerc because he seems to be in low spirits oftentimes.
Also, I really think that that's a good quality for an engineer to have, just so he can motivate your driver to achieve, more than they can, which is really good for them. And
an interesting stat that I heard on the broadcast is that this is Piastri's first race in Imola.
Yeah.
At least in F1. I'm not sure that he's raced there in F2.
Yeah.
But otherwise, for sure, at least his first race there in F1. So interesting for him, and he had a good qualifying. I mean, he qualified in, really he was P2, and then he had a 3-place grid penalty. So he even out-qualified his teammate. So definitely, for his first time in F1 at Imola, a really good result for him.
Yeah, definitely overall. Really good. And also a really good race for him as well.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the kind of silly things from Williams, I think, they didn't put Albon's tires on properly.
That's very silly mistake. That shouldn't really be happening. I mean, the pit stop should be a basic thing where it should be in and out. You shouldn't be really much of a problem. You shouldn't really think about it. But that really cost Albon his race.
Yeah,
because he slowed down at the middle of the track because he noticed that his tire was coming off. His front right tire was coming off. Yeah,
I think that's when it looked the most loose. It was hard to say really because all the tires looked okay. But yeah, when he pulled away from the pit box, the front right did look a little weird.
Yes, it did look. And obviously, the FIA has the rule where if it's unsafe release, so they eventually gave him a 10-second penalty for that.
Yeah,
he had to pit again for the mediums, and that just really cost him his race.
Yeah, entirely. So that definitely was not what Albon would have wanted. Both Williams did not have a good race, but
no.
Yeah, so not great for Williams at this race. This will be one they want to forget.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is most of their races.
Most of the races, yeah.
So then Alonso's brakes were on fire, fully on fire. He pitted around lap 10, or I think it was about lap 8. And he came out of the pits, and the brakes were actually on fire.
Yeah, they were on fire, but it really didn't seem much of an issue as the wind naturally put it out after that.
But it is interesting because, of course, that's not really something we see very often.
Not really. I mean, last time we saw brakes on fire was Verstappen
in Australia. And he, of course, went out. So interesting.
Well, that's because his brakes exploded too.
That's all. Yeah. But it is still very interesting, I think, to see this problem coming for Alonso. Just I don't know that this will matter, but it is strange that they caught on fire.
Yeah.
In the first place.
Definitely. I mean, also on the pit exit too. Like, was there like a spark from?
That's probably that's probably what it is. They're probably tightening it.
Oh, and then there's probably a spark on it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I bet with the wheel guns, there's a spark. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, because those brakes get so hot.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Mm-hmm. That's probably about what it is. So another interesting thing. Okay, so I think at this point in the season, McLaren definitely have the second fastest car, right? Piastri was sticking right on the back of Sainz.
Yes.
For a lot of the race.
Yeah.
And Norris was like kind of staying with Max, but Max wasn't pulling away as much as he did like sometimes last season where he had like 10-second lead.
Yes.
It wasn't that to that extent. So the question is now, I think, does McLaren have the second fastest or the fastest car?
Well, I think at this point they don't. I think they have the second fastest car. I think Verstappen was making just like very, I don't know, like not uncharacteristic errors on his part. Like I think we saw where what was it? He like cut a corner.
He went over a chicane. He went over a chicane. Essentially cut the chicane. Yeah,
and then he like hit his floor and stuff. It was like a weird mistake.
He like jumped over it.
Yeah, he jumped over it, and that's like very unforced error on his part. So I don't know if he's getting too comfortable up there, or is that the car is slower.
Yeah, but so I think it is because Norris and towards the end of the race, Norris was catching him fast.
Yes.
So I think McLaren is the second fastest team for sure.
Yes.
The question is just, are they faster than the Red Bull? I mean, in some cases, it seems like yes. And it might be a track-by-track sort of thing. So maybe some tracks McLaren is better, some tracks Red Bull is better. But I think really what we're seeing is McLaren's kind of starting to challenge Red Bull's dominance.
Definitely. But we also see that Perez isn't also doing the greatest job as the second guy. So it's only Verstappen fighting two McLarens at this point.
Yeah.
So maybe that's also like how Red Bull's portrayed is just one driver and Perez is bringing them down. But I think McLaren is really catching them, and I think Ferrari's getting left behind a little bit, because we did see Leclerc. He did try to catch Lando. I mean, he was close to catching Lando, but then he made a mistake and he just fell behind. Yeah. And then Sainz, we saw that Piastri was on him the entire time.
Yeah.
And once Sainz pitted, Piastri never really looked back.
Yeah.
And he was way ahead of Sainz at that point.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting, and we'll have to keep seeing. I think if the McLaren continues to progress as they are, because they definitely need to keep doing that to maintain their spot.
Yeah.
So I think that's the biggest thing we have to watch for, and it's also like you said with Perez. I mean, then you if you look at Perez compared to McLaren, McLaren's clearly has the better car when you compare him to Perez. So then, like we said before, maybe it's Max driving that car as really well, and Perez is kind of showing more where their performance is at.
Yes, but we clearly see this is no RB19.
Yeah.
We see that this dominance, Max is not winning by like 20, 30 seconds anymore. Yeah. Teams are catching up, they're catching on, and it's very exciting to see that these teams actually finally figured it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it adds some sort of like enjoyment to the sport.
Definitely.
Which is why we'll see what happens in 2026.
Possibly see a big three.
Yeah,
like just a big three dominance.
Yeah,
like McLaren, Ferrari, and Red Bull. Yeah.
But then we'll see then for 2026 who manages to get it right with the new regulations.
Definitely. I think 2026 will be a big year for F1.
Yeah, definitely. We'll see if that changes the kind of things we're seeing, the trends we're seeing right now.
Yes.
But to get back to the race here. So what I thought was interesting is that Verstappen was complaining about his tires. So specifically for him, it was the front left.
Yeah.
But I wonder if this is a sign that Red Bull's tire degradation is not very good. They're having problems with that. Maybe they had at least last year they had some suspension setup things that were causing their tires, I think, to wear a little faster. They were riding a bit lower.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if they're doing that again this year and that's affecting their tires.
Yes.
But Verstappen was complaining about his tires more so than the McLarens for sure. The Ferraris were also complaining about tires.
Yes.
But the McLarens were not that much.
Yes, but we also saw that clearly Verstappen had issues with his tires because we saw Norris drastically catch up to him at the end, and I think the difference was, 2 laps. I think Norris had 2 laps older of tires than Verstappen, and he caught up like 6 seconds towards the end of the race in the final 10 laps. And that's really scary for Red Bull because like they luckily pulled away with Verstappen getting that win. I think it was like 0.7 of a second.
Yeah, it was really close.
And they need to figure it out, or else McLaren will pass them up.
Yeah. So Albon got a penalty for that incident we talked about earlier.
Yes.
It was kind of took a while for that penalty to come through.
Yeah.
But so he got a 10-second penalty for him, which really didn't matter at that point because Albon was like so far behind everybody else.
He was already lapped by that time.
Yeah.
So.
And Piastri was very quick. McLaren had a lot of pace on the hards.
Yes.
And I've noticed too. I feel like McLaren seems to still do well even when their tires are old. So especially like Norris looking at the end of the race, and even when their tires are new, it's not like they're bad on new tires.
Yeah.
And again, like I said, Piastri was very quick on his new hards.
Yeah.
But Norris and Piastri too were still quick even at the end of their stints.
Yeah.
Which is definitely interesting to watch. Maybe they're doing a lot of tire managing.
Yeah.
But still, those tires are holding up for them.
Well, that's also another thing with when we compare McLaren and Red Bull, is that does McLaren actually have a better car, or is this they're managing the tires better?
Yeah.
I mean, that could also be, that's definitely a factor that factors into this. But we'll see.
Yeah. So Norris has, before we get to that, was it Albon retired on lap 54. I'm not totally sure why. He just seemed to kind of, they were like, we're done. We're just kind of.
Well, I mean, Williams is kind of spread thin too. They don't want any like unnecessary damage to Albon's car.
So maybe he still had issues with that tire or something. It was something deeper in the car.
Yeah.
But not great for them. And then Norris, the last 10 laps of this race were so exciting. And Norris had this huge push at the end.
Yes.
I thought he was going to catch Max.
So he did have the pace. He was going to catch Max, but he made an error.
Yeah.
And went into the gravel a little bit. And I think that just costed him the race because there's not enough time left.
Yeah, he made too many silly mistakes.
Yeah.
I think he was pushing really hard, and that was very obvious.
Yes.
But the problem is he made too many silly mistakes. And that kind of ruined the end of his race for him.
Yeah, he really couldn't get into that DRS range, which was really important for him to actually pass Max.
Yeah.
But yeah, really unfortunate that he did have to make those mistakes.
Yeah, so again, the finishing order, nothing too out of the ordinary here. Again, the Alpines are very far down, 14 and 16 for those two. Yuki Tsunoda picked up a point in 10th place.
He did.
Perez managed to do somewhat of a comeback in P8.
And we see George Russell also picking up the extra point for the fastest lap.
And then only one retirement in this race from Albon. Yeah. So a pretty good race overall.
But I also wanted to say the way George Russell had to pit towards the end, and then Hamilton went ahead. It was an interesting point there to make.
Yeah.
Like about what was that? What was that about?
Well, they had the space behind them. They had the gap to Perez that they could essentially have a free pit stop.
Yeah.
Russell had talked on the radio about Hamilton letting him pass. So I think Russell wanted to take that place back. I really don't know why he bothered to pit. He was able to get the fastest lap. Yeah. So that's probably part of why is that he wanted to just go for the fastest lap. But it seemed like a little bit of a late move for them.
Definitely, because Hamilton's definitely not going to give him that place back. Yeah. I think that was what really stood out to me because I don't know why they did it so late, but they still got the fastest lap point out of that though.
Yeah, definitely. So that was a pretty good race overall.
Yeah.
But I want to move on to something I think I find it interesting at least.
Yes.
So we are going to go over one of our very first episodes. I think it might have been our first episode.
I think it was episode 1, yes.
Yeah, it was our predictions for the season. And I know we're only about a third of the way in, but I want to go over those predictions. And I will say that
I want to rub it in a little bit about my little dark horse prediction here.
We'll see. But and I will say the points we're going to be going with are the most recent points, and I know we are a bit behind here, so the points will be after the Spanish Grand Prix.
Yes.
I promise we'll be catching up soon. We're working on it.
Yes.
But so that's the points we're going with, and then we're just going to go and see how we are in terms of what we thought, what we predicted versus the real.
Yes, definitely.
So we'll start with constructors. So we'll just go through real quick our 1 to 10. So I had Red Bull, Ferrari, then McLaren, Mercedes, Alpine, Aston, Williams, Stake, AlphaTauri, which is now VCarb, of course, and Haas. Those are my top 10, and then how about you?
I had Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, Aston, Alpine, Williams, was AlphaTauri before.
Yeah.
Stake, and Haas.
So, somewhat similar, somewhat different from what we thought. So,
yes.
First of all, Red Bull, first place. Obviously, we kind of expected that one. No shocker there.
Yes.
Ferrari is still in second place at this point.
But
So, McLaren is catching up, and I do think that they probably will catch up.
Yes.
However, at this point in time, Ferrari is still ahead. So I think that's interesting. Again, I mean, they have had some success. Of course, Leclerc, we'll get to that in a future episode, but he did win. Sainz won in Australia. So, and they've had good results.
Yes.
Like pretty consistently up in like the at least like top 5 range.
Yeah.
So they've been consistently pretty good. But I do think McLaren is catching up.
I do think they will catch up by the end of the season, but we'll see if Ferrari does make those moves as well.
So fourth place is Mercedes.
So I got
just
Mercedes in fourth.
as I predicted.
Me too.
Mercedes, but then for me at least, the big problem is I had Alpine next in fifth place. Alpine is currently in seventh. They've had some recent success again at the Spanish Grand Prix. They did okay. And they've gotten some points recently. But they are very much not in
Aston,
fifth.
But I got Aston at fifth as well.
Yeah, so Aston is in fifth place. There's a big gap between them and Mercedes, though.
Yeah.
So that one will be hard for Aston to catch up, especially this season. They have not been nearly as good as they were last season. Picking up those podiums like they did at the beginning of the season, that's not happening this year.
No, that's definitely not.
And then in sixth place is actually VCarb.
Oh, I had Alpine in sixth.
Yeah, so I had Aston Martin sixth, so clearly not great for me. I had AlphaTauri, or VCarb, I suppose, all the way down in ninth.
I had an eighth.
Yeah, so VCarb's doing pretty well. Yuki Tsunoda's picking up a lot of points. Ricciardo is as well, but I do think that Tsunoda he's picking up, I feel like, the bulk of the points. He's more consistently in the points. And really, I think Yuki is most of the time outperforming Ricciardo.
Definitely. I mean, we've seen it just time and time again. Yuki has been in the points a lot of times, and we see his performance. He's been looking quick up there in the RB.
Yeah.
For the RB standards, obviously, but it's unfortunate to see that Ricciardo, he's having good qualifying times.
Yeah.
I will say that, but it's just that
he's
not holding up at all in the race.
Yeah. So looking down again further, it's Alpine in seventh, Haas in eighth, Williams in ninth, and Sauber in 10th. They have not scored a single point.
See, that's what I thought Haas was going to be. So we at the beginning, we thought Haas was going nowhere.
Yeah.
But we saw Kevin Magnussen happen.
So he's been really propelling his teammate out there. And that has really helped Haas to get to where they are at this point in the standings.
Yeah.
They're still, of course, not high in the standings, but they're doing better than we thought.
Yes.
So that's something for them. And then, of course, Williams and Sauber, it's been sad for Williams.
Yeah.
Albon has picked up those 2 points. Really, Logan, as much as we might want him to, is not picking up the points.
Not at all.
So
that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's not looking great for them right now in terms of at least they're standing in the constructors.
Yep.
But of course, better than Sauber, so that's something.
Drivers. This is bad.
We're not gonna go through our full list of drivers,
but it's pretty bad. It's not looking great.
So, all right. So again, remember just again that this is after the Spanish Grand Prix. So Verstappen, I think we both had Verstappen first.
We did.
That's solid. We got that cemented. I think we both had Perez next. Yeah.
Where's he
So
at?
Perez is all the way down in 5th place right now, behind
right.
both Ferraris and Lando Norris, and of course Max Verstappen. So not a good start for Sergio Perez.
Nope.
It does not look good for him. It also looks bad as Red Bull has just re-signed him, and so it's like.
I mean, I think I noticed that right when they re-signed him, his performance dropped off dramatically.
Yeah.
So I feel like he
needs that motivation.
Maybe he had that motivation. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And then moving down, I had Leclerc and Hamilton in 3rd and 4th.
Me too.
So Leclerc is in 3rd.
Yes.
So I got that one.
Hamilton is not in 4th.
Hamilton is down in 8th place. Not good for him either.
I think that's just the Mercedes.
I think that is true. Mercedes is not having a good season.
No.
But interestingly enough, can't be an engine thing because they share an engine. Well, I suppose Mercedes provides the engine for McLaren.
Yes.
And McLaren is doing much better, as Lando Norris is in P2.
Yes.
At this point, only above Leclerc by 2 points, but that's still something. Mm-hmm. And Piastri is down in 6th.
Oh, which I had. I had Piastri in 6th.
Well, good for you.
Yeah.
But that's still good for both of them. It's a good result for both McLarens.
Yes.
But interesting again that they share an engine, but Mercedes is clearly not doing as well as McLaren. So
yes.
It'll be interesting to see if they can make those probably aerodynamic improvements.
Definitely.
Yeah. Otherwise, looking down, most of it is probably not too far off.
I think my P20 was definitely so correct.
Well, the other problem is...
It's actually not really. No, it's not.
Well, because we had Logan Sargent in P20. But really...
He's in P21.
He is in 21st place, yes. Because Ollie Behrman, when he raced his one race in Saudi Arabia, scored 6 points. So he is 13th place in the standings. And Logan Sargent has been kicked down to 21st in a 20-driver grid. So it doesn't get much worse than that. But otherwise, again, both of the kickstoppers scored no points, 19th and 20th.
I think I had them switched around, but still 19 and 20.
It doesn't matter too much.
Yeah.
And Albon picking up not many points. I think we both had thought that Albon would be better.
Yeah, definitely.
And he has not shown that. I mean, of course, this Williams car is not very good.
Yeah, it's definitely the Williams, in my opinion.
But still, either way, he has not been putting in the performances we expected from him.
No, definitely not.
Gasly down in 15th. Also not really where I expected him to be.
I had Gasly in 10.
Yeah, so I think we both kind of thought Alpine would not be this terrible.
Yeah, we really thought Alpine would do much better than this. But clearly, I mean, it seems to be looking up a little bit.
They seem to be doing better. So that's good for them at least, getting back up there. But they did just hire Flavio Briatore. Now, Briatore is a very controversial man, and he was banned from FIA Motorsport for life, but that was like reduced, like they took it away from him.
Because he challenged it. I think he probably sued him.
Yeah, but the thing is, essentially, Briatore was involved in this whole scandal in Singapore. And it was a few years ago now. It's 2008 when this happened. So he was working for Renault, so essentially Alpine now.
Yeah.
And they told Nelson Piquet to crash on purpose so that they could get a safety car, and Fernando Alonso, his teammate, could win.
Yeah.
So this is very controversial for Alpine to do. It's a very controversial move. He is now hired as their executive advisor. So I don't know if you want a man who was banned from FIA Motorsport for life as your advisor.
Yeah.
So a very interesting move there from...
And this scandal was what costed Felipe Massa the World Championship, from which Lewis Hamilton did win in 2008.
Yeah. So, like I said, a very controversial move from Alpine. We'll see if this really helps them. I don't know that it will.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Otherwise, though, the driver standings look pretty close to what we predicted, I think.
Yeah.
For me, at least, I think Tsunoda's a little higher. And otherwise, though... And Sainz is higher.
And Norris is definitely higher.
Yeah, Norris. I mean, the two Ferraris and the McLarens are higher than I think we all expected.
Yeah, definitely.
But otherwise, at the bottom of the pack, it's fairly close to what we expected, except for the Alpine. All right, so we're going to transition here a little bit. And I know this is a little bit further in time, but we're going to talk a little bit about Le Mans.
Yes.
Now, this is the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Takes place in the Circuit de la Sarthe in France. A very famous race, one of the Triple Crown of motorsport, which is comprised of the Monaco Grand Prix, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and the Indy 500.
Yeah.
And we will get to that. I promise. I'm getting around to watching it, and we will have that up shortly.
Yeah.
I think we'll just hop right into the race.
Yeah, so this race, I'm fairly new to motorsport, so I don't really know much about it. So we'll probably ask like a few questions.
Yeah.
Like I'll ask a few questions and you maybe answer that.
Of course, yeah.
So like, how does the 24 Hours of Le Mans work?
So essentially, it's a 24-hour long race, as you would assume.
Yeah.
And it is part of the World Endurance Championship of the WEC, but there are cars that enter from the European Le Mans series as well as the Asian Le Mans series. And so it's all the teams will have 3 drivers. So they'll switch off. They have rules about how long they have to drive, and how long they can drive. So they have limits on how long they can drive, and they also have like drivers have to drive a certain amount of laps.
Yeah.
Or time. It's time.
Okay.
And then basically there's 3 different categories. So there's the hypercar class, which is the like fastest cars. They're sort of they're kind of similar in some ways, I think, to like Formula 1 cars. As they have like a hybrid system, and they're actually, what's interesting about this is they have very different engines. So the Cadillac is like naturally aspirated, but some of these cars have turbos.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see the difference there. So these cars are gonna be very fast. Obviously, they're not gonna be as like aerodynamically efficient as maybe like a Formula 1 car.
Yeah.
But they're very quick. They have a lot of power. Then we have the LMP2, or sometimes they're just the like the other prototype class, you know.
Yeah.
It's a similar sort of class as the hypercars, but it is a prototype, so they don't have the electrical system, and they're going to be a little bit slower than the hypercars, but they won't look like road cars.
Okay.
And then there's the LMGT3, which has changed somewhat in recent years, but essentially it is sort of like modified road cars. So they're like race cars, but they're like, you know, you have your Ferraris, you have your like 296 GTBs, you have your Corvette C8s, C8Rs, I suppose.
But they're modified to be
essentially
better.
They look more like road cars. Like if you look at it, it looks like a Ferrari 296. That, well, you probably won't just see one on the street because they're Ferraris, but essentially it's sort of like that, right? And so again, and they'll have pit stops. They'll change drivers. They can actually. What's interesting, I learned this year, is that they can run 2 different sets of tires.
Oh.
So they can have, maybe if like the lefts are wearing differently than the right side of the car, they can put like harder tires on the left side and a little bit softer tires on the right side. So interesting. I would think that would affect the feel of the car, maybe to the driver, but I guess it's not enough of a difference at least that they'll really care.
So what about, so we see the three different classes, hypercar, LMGT3, and LMP2. So is it like, are there like different, are the standings placed differently for each class?
Yeah, so there's an overall winner, and that's going to be it's going to be your hypercars, because nobody's going to beat the hypercars in the other 2 classes. So they will be the overall winners as well as the winner within their class. Yeah. Then there will be a winner within the LMP2 class.
Yes.
And a winner within the LMGT3 class.
Okay.
So essentially, they'll be placed in an overall standing as well as a standing within their class.
I see. But have we ever seen someone other than the hypercar class win?
Not in like recent times.
But has it happened?
I'm sure at some point it has happened.
Okay.
But in like recent times, these hypercars are so fast that it's impossible.
Yeah. Okay.
Another thing that I think makes this series and this race too really fun is that they can like essentially pit and repair their car. So actually it's funny, is the Hertz team Jota had a big incident on their number 12 car.
Yeah.
I believe it was the number 12. And they were able to take that car and essentially rebuild it. It was the day before, but they essentially rebuilt that whole car.
Wow.
And they can take these stops. I mean, they probably won't win if they take an hour, 2 hours to repair their car.
Yeah.
But they can do it, and that's an interesting thing. If nothing else, it lets them keep driving, keep at least collecting data and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, a really cool thing that's really you only see in endurance racing, and even then really only in these kind of race, like a 12-hour race or a 24-hour race, you're going to see these kind of things. So it's really, really cool to watch.
It's also very impressive that they can fix the car, rebuild the car in an hour.
Yeah. So, and it goes back to a while ago. If you've watched the Ford versus Ferrari movie, which I don't know that you have, it is a good movie. I would recommend it. But in that movie, they kind of, you see how they started to get into this, like, changing parts. They begin, in that movie, they changed the brakes on the Ford GT40. And that's kind of where a lot of this started, this idea of changing parts and changing stuff on the fly. And then it really evolved into something that's really integrated into the sport. And I think it's really cool to watch.
Wow, that's really cool. I mean, we see that in F1, that they really don't change the parts. If your parts are broken, that's it. You're done.
Or you get a penalty at least.
Yeah, no.
So, getting into the race now, I watched some of it. Of course, you're not going to really watch all of it. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody that does. That is not me. But I watched as much as I could. And I will say at the beginning, the number 6 Porsche was very quick in a straight line. Those Porsches seemed to be real quick in a straight line. which is definitely good, especially at the beginning. There are some really big long straights in this track. Now we can see in the final standings, Porsche wasn't able to secure a podium, but they were able to get P4 with the number 6 car and P6 with the number 5 car. Some other Porsches finished a little lower, like the Hertz cars in 8th and 9th, and a few other ones that I believe were unable to finish the race. But still a pretty good car looking from the Porsche car. The Porsche team's been doing well. The Hertz team, sadly, did not do very well. They have shown pace recently, but they weren't able to do anything with it. Of course, they do carry a former F1 driver with them in the form of Jenson Button. But they were not able to amount to too much in this race. Now, the 50 Ferrari got past the Cadillac, the number 3 Cadillac, very, very quickly. So off the start, those two were close together, and right up at the front of the pack. And the Ferrari was so quick to get past him. Like, it was like, it wasn't even funny how fast he got past. And I was kind of surprised because the Cadillacs were supposed to be pretty good here. They really didn't end up very high, lower than the Porsches even in P7 with the number 2 car, and then the other car, the Action Express Racing, finished all the way down in 29th in basically the middle of the LMGT3 field. So not a good race at all. As well as the number 3 car finishing all the way down in 49th. So really not great for them. They had to do some big repairs on that car. Not good. Not a good result for Cadillac. Now the Ferraris, again, the other Ferrari, the 50 Ferrari got past the Porsche number 6 before the end of the first lap. And again, those Porsches were supposed to be really good. That Porsche was at the front of the field, and the Ferrari was just flying by them. They had so much pace, they had so much speed that really they were kind of unmatched, I feel like, for a lot of this race. The number 50 winning this year. Last year, the number 51 was the big winner. However, in this race, they were only able to finish P3, which is still a very good result for them. Of course, in a 24-hour race, it's hard to really do much if they even finish the race. So coming in P3 is definitely not a bad result. But the number 50 pulled it out this race. So now, I will say that Nick DeVries in the hypercar, again a former F1 driver, was last in the hypercar field in the Toyota. So he was 23rd towards the beginning of the race. The Toyotas did not look strong at the beginning. They really did not look good. I don't know exactly what was going on with them, but they were slow at the beginning of the race. But they managed to pull through. They finished P2 and like P5. I'm pretty sure I think they might have had another car in there, but don't quote me on that because I'm not totally sure on there. But still, a very strong comeback drive for those Toyotas. They really managed to turn the race around because it was not looking good for them for a little bit in there. The Mustangs also look very good. Again, this is the first year for the Mustang LMGT3 car after the return of Ford after the Ford GT. And it was actually a solid fight from the Mustang LMGT3 for the lead, especially towards the beginning of the race. They really were able to do something with that car, and it was fast. They did not end up doing very well when we get to the final standings, but the fact that they were able to get progress, they were able to get some sort of fighting for the win. That's definitely a good thing for them, and definitely something that's exciting for them to see. Now the both Ferrari hypercars actually had really long pit stops on their first pit stop. I don't know what's going on with them. I feel like they're having maybe some problems with refueling, but they were not good pits for them. And then the number 50 Ferrari actually was losing a lot of oil. So especially at the beginning of the race, I think it stopped at some point, but the car was losing a lot of oil. And a lot of drivers behind were complaining about it. But they were losing a lot of oil. It was not good. They were able to figure it out, and obviously they made it through to the end. But they were losing a lot of oil. It was getting all over everybody else on the track, so not good for them. But otherwise, when you watch a 24-hour race, there's not always a whole lot going on. Some of it's kind of standard, so there's not always a ton of like news and things to report. But a good race. A lot of cars, especially in the hypercar field, managed to stay on the lead lap. All the way down to P9, managed to stay on the lead lap on what ended up being lap 311 after the 24 hours. Yeah. So good for them. The Lamborghinis in their first year also did fairly okay, considering, again, it was their first year. Yeah. P10 and P13 for the two Lamborghinis. And then the LMP2, the Inter-Euro pool that won last year, coming in second in their class. So that's close for them, almost there, but the United Autosports was able to pull it out. The AO Racing, I thought it was interesting. I don't know exactly why they did this, but AO Racing only entered in the LMGT3 field. The LMP2 field. I would have thought they would have entered the Rexy in the LMGT3. I guess they decided not to. And then Manthe EMA winning in LMGT3, which is good for them because they just won the last championship in DTM. It's just another racing series for these kind of GT cars. So great for Manthe. And again, Proton competition with their two, I believe they had 3 total Mustangs. They came in P3 in their field. So those Mustangs seem to have some pace in their first year. Well, that wraps it up. It was a bit of a long episode for us, but we had a lot to get in there. So, again, we'll keep trying to get these races out for you guys. Yeah. But thank you, and we'll see you for the next one.
Goodbye.